Almost.
Okay, everybody.
Yeah, go ahead
It
and
is
take questions.
just a minute after 6 o'clock, so I think we're going to go ahead and get started. Welcome to our Red Zone panel event, or our No More Red Zone panel event. My name is Francesca Brandt. I'm the Assistant Director of Resolution and Engagement within the Dean of Students Office, and we have partnered with the Victims Advocate and all of these wonderful people who are here with us today to talk about the Red Zone. So to first start off, I just want to share a care warning. We are going to be talking about sexual assault, sexual violence, and even rape. So if there is any point during this presentation or during the questions being answered, if you feel like you need to leave and step out and take a breath, that is completely fine. Please do so. Okay, to review our agenda, our very small agenda for today. So I am going to start with a welcome. We're going to introduce, our panelists are going to introduce themselves. We're going to talk about what the Red Zone is, and then we'll get into our questions and answers. So welcome. Again, I'm Francesca Brandt. I'm the Assistant Director of Resolution and Engagement, and I'm the panel moderator for today. Okay, so first question is, what is the Red Zone? That's why you all are here. So the Red Zone is the period of time from the beginning of the fall semester through about Thanksgiving break when the most sexual assaults occur on college campuses. That time frame can be from about midnight to 6 a.m. on Saturdays and Sundays, but it can also occur at any time. What is sexual violence? So sexual violence is any unwanted sexual activity that is an individual is forced or manipulated into without consent. And we'll talk about consent here in a moment because I know that might be a word that we're not all familiar with. But it does affect all genders, all sexual orientations, and all ages. There's also something called acquaintance assault, and that is someone whom the victim or the survivor knows personally. And this is the most common type of sexual assault or sexual violence. So what we have up here is just a little diagram or a spectrum that was provided by Bonnie Shade Speaks LLC, and it just shows all the different types of sexual violence that can occur, because it can be something as small as a sexist joke or maybe some harassment, some name calling, but it can extend all the way to stalking or rape. Consent. So what is consent? Consent is a verbal agreement between all participants who are involved to engage in sexual activity. So one acronym that we like to use for this is that consent moves. The M stands for mutual. So that means that it is between I agree and the other person agrees. It's ongoing. So for the entire stint of the sexual activity that's happening, each party agrees and continues to agree and consent to the sexual activity. Next, it's verbal. So that means it's the other person has spoken that they do consent to what is happening. It's enthusiastic. So you want to be enthusiastic, or the person wants sexual activity that is occurring. And then finally, it's sober. So there's been no alcohol or substance use whatsoever during the sexual activity or before. Okay, and we're going to watch this video to hopefully help define consent a little bit more.
If you're still struggling with consent, just imagine instead of initiating sex, you're making them a cup of tea. You say, hey, would you like a cup of tea? They go, oh my God, I would love a cup of tea. Thank you. Then you know they want a cup of tea. If you say, hey, would you like a cup of tea? And they're like, I'm not really sure. Then you can make them a cup of tea, or not, but be aware they might not drink it. And if they don't drink it, then, and this is the important part, don't make them drink it. Just because you made it doesn't mean you are entitled to watch them drink it. And if they say no thank you, then don't make them tea at all. Just don't make them tea. Don't make them drink tea. Don't get annoyed at them for not wanting tea. They just don't want tea, okay? They might say, yes, please, that's kind of you. And then when the tea arrives, they actually don't want the tea at all. Sure, that's kind of annoying as you've gone all the effort of making the tea, but they remain under no obligation to drink the tea. They did want tea, now they don't. Some people change their mind in the time that it takes to boil the kettle, brew the tea, and add the milk. And it's okay for people to change their mind. And you are still not entitled to watch them drink it. And if they're unconscious, don't make them tea. Unconscious people don't want tea. And they can't answer the question, do you want tea? Because they're unconscious. Okay, maybe they were conscious when you asked them if they wanted tea. And they said yes. But in the time it took you to boil the kettle, brew the tea, and add the milk, they are now unconscious. You should just put the tea down. Make sure the unconscious person is safe. And this is the important part again. Don't make them drink the tea. They said yes then, sure, but unconscious people don't want tea. If someone said yes to tea, started drinking it, and then passed out before they finished it, don't keep on pouring it down their throat. Take the tea away. Make sure they're safe, because unconscious people don't want tea. Trust me on this. If someone said yes to tea around your house last Saturday, that doesn't mean they want you to make them tea all the time. They don't want you to come around to their place unexpectedly and make them tea and force them to drink it going, but you wanted tea last week. Or to wake up to find you pouring tea down their throat going, but you wanted tea last night. But if you can understand how completely ludicrous it is to force people to have tea when they don't want tea, and you're able to understand when people don't want tea, then how hard is it to understand it when it comes to sex? Whether it's tea or sex, consent is everything. And on that note, I'm going to go make myself a cup of tea.
Okay, so hopefully that clears up what consent really means if you did not get what the explanation was earlier. Sorry, hold on. There we go. Okay, so now we're going to have our panelists introduce themselves, and what we will do is start with Tom Van Shore at the very end.
Hey everybody, my name is Tom Van Shore. I'm the student ombudsman in the Dean of Students office. In that role, I help under students stay on the policies and procedures of the university, guide them through different resources, help them with any of a number of different procedures for a variety of reasons. Also, previous to that, I was one of our Title IX coordinators. So I've been involved with Title IX and sexual misconduct for most of my career, actually.
Thank you, Tom. Julie?
My name is Julie Baker Townsend. I am a women's health nurse practitioner and a family nurse practitioner. I teach here at University of North Florida. I teach women's health in undergraduate and graduate studies, and I work in the clinic with Ms. Howe. We see women, we see trans patients, I see men, but our goal is to educate and to give students the resources that they need to navigate this journey, which can be difficult.
Thank you, Julie. Oh, I have y'all in the wrong order. I'm sorry. Whitney.
We traded.
Hi everyone, my name is Whitney Washington. I use she, her pronouns. I serve as the Victims Advocate Coordinator for the Victims Advocacy Program, which is located within the Women's Center. The Victims Advocacy Program provides 24-hour crisis intervention to anyone who's a survivor of a crime. Our services are confidential, and our goal is to provide supportive services to anyone who's a survivor, as well as make sure we're upholding their rights. And we're located in Founders Hall. We have a 24-hour crisis helpline, so that's probably the best way to contact an advocate, and we're available 24/7.
Thanks, Whitney. Now, Dr. Taylor.
Okay. Hi, my name is Dr. Carlene Taylor. I am a clinical assistant professor in the Brooks College of Health in the Department of Public Health, most known around campus for the Osprey Perch program. I am the original author and director of a clinical training program where interns in mental health, social work, as well as postgraduate fellows, work with some licensed professionals to provide embedded services. So you will see the Osprey Perch counselors around athletics, res life, student health services. Our philosophy is that we meet you where you live, work, and play. My background in this particular subject is for most of my 25 years of practice. I've done a lot of work in sexual trauma abuse evaluations, as well as working with persons who have been accused or convicted of sexual offenses, recognizing that all people are people. And the human experience is very messy, and it's opportunities for education and opportunities for engagement that allows us to sort through some of that and build a safer society.
Thank you. Okay, Adam.
Hi, my name's Adam Brown. I'm the Deputy Chief at UPD, and been a police officer for a long time, over 30 years. I was at JSO before I came here, about 27 years at JSO. One of the jobs I had was as Chief of Detectives, so all the detectives for the various units reported to me. So as you can imagine, I've seen a lot of sexual assault cases and dealt with a lot of victims, so I'm very passionate about this subject.
Thank you. Emily?
Hi, my name is Emily Sullivan. I'm a junior here at UNF studying kinesiology. I'm a senator for student government. Within student government, we have the term students serving students, so I'm here to kind of be the students' voice. We write JRs, which are joint resolutions, which are things that like the students want to see the school doing, and we advocate for the things the student body wants to see.
Thank you. Mark?
Hi everyone, my name is Mark Harris. I am the coordinator of Mentoring Program and Student Success over at the Office of Diversity and Inclusion. I work specifically in the Intercultural Center. I oversee 3 student cultural organizations, and that is the Black Student Union, the Latin American Student Organization, and the Asian Student Alliance. And I also oversee our male mentoring program called the Brotherhood.
Thank you, Mark. Okay, last but not least, Amy.
Hi, I'm Amy Howell. I have 2 roles here. I teach in the nursing program, and then also I'm a women's health nurse practitioner in the student health clinic. I've been there for about 7 years, where we see, unfortunately, too many sexual assault victims. So it was probably my 3rd fall when I started to know what the red zone was before I actually knew there was such a thing as the red zone. So I always am anxious to be part of any effort on campus to educate, to prevent. Dr. Baker Townsend and I really enjoy being part of this so that we can try to be part of the solution.
Thank you. Okay, so we're going to go ahead and start our questions. I have a list of questions here that I'm going to ask the panelists, but please feel free at any time to raise your hand and ask questions if you do have questions about the questions that are being asked. Okay, so our first question is for Amy. What is consent and what does consent look like?
So my favorite consent video she used, everybody knows I love that one with the T because I think it just makes a lot of sense without, you could read a verbal definition of what is consent, or you could watch that video and very clearly understand that consent has to be also, the acronym that she used is also my favorite, the MOVES, mutual, ongoing, verbal, enthusiastic, and sober. If you don't have all of those things, no one can give consent and no one can evaluate if their partner is giving consent. So those things are important. One thing I did want to say is I often hear from victims, I didn't say no, or I didn't fight them off, which perpetuates that self-blame, victim blaming. Victims often describe freezing up. So that person's obviously not giving verbal consent. So we need to understand other ways that you might know that a person is not into it. That's one thing that you hear from people who are accused of these crimes is, I thought they were into it. So we have to become more educated about knowing when someone is into it, which is why that clear, enthusiastic, verbal yes has to be part of the equation. And it has to be ongoing. Just because you willingly and enthusiastically had sex with someone yesterday does not mean that you have to do that today. So I think that's important. Reframing consent, I think, is important as an active, living, changing process. It requires listening, it requires awareness, as well as assertion and respect for boundaries. boundaries. And we're going to talk about boundaries later on in the presentation, but understanding what is okay with you, and then the tough part, upholding that boundary that you've made for yourself. So actively giving consent, and then what do I do if I haven't given consent and this person continues on? What do we do? It's important to agree on what is and is not okay. And it seems a little strange, especially to, my patients who are college students, to have a verbal conversation about what sexual activities are going to be okay and what are not beforehand. When I tell my patients that, they have this look on their face like, what world are you living in, lady? But I think it's important. And it needs to become not something that is taboo that we can't talk about, but something that is expected that we talk about. What is and is not okay with you? That's actually different for all of us, which is super important. It's also important to learn to accept a no. That's part of consent, right? We have to learn to accept a no. And the truth is, some people have trouble accepting a no in all parts of their life that has nothing to do with sexual activity, right? So a big part of this is learning to accept a no. Consent cannot be assumed just because sexual activity has happened in the past or within the context of a relationship. Like whatever your relationship is, whether it's monogamous and connected, whether it's long term, assault can happen within those relationships, and it's important to understand that. Some of my victims will say, well, it was my boyfriend. Well, it's still rape. It's really no different just because of your level of attachment to that person. Consent is revocable at any time. I use a lot more specific examples when I'm talking to my patients that I'll save you guys from, but no is okay up till any point, okay? Everybody's naked, no is still okay. So it's important to know. Consent can never be given if impaired judgment is present due to the influence of drugs or alcohol. Dr. Baker Townsend and I were talking about a really great example in healthcare is, if you're at the hospital and you need to sign consent for any kind of medical treatment or a surgery, or if you have had pain pills, or you can't legally sign that document. They won't let you. So it should be the same with the way we approach sexual activity. Not only can you not properly give consent when your judgment is impaired, maybe your inhibitions are lowered. Not only can you not give consent, but the other person, whether they're inebriated or not, cannot accurately tell whether or not you are giving consent. So that's why the no T at all, if anybody's impaired, has to be the way forward. And that will actually prevent a lot of these things. And then, of course, as a healthcare provider, I have to bring in that it's important to have these discussions ahead of time. It's easier than you think. Once you get started, you can actually talk about these things. I could talk about things in the exam room that I never thought I would be able to talk about. You just approach it as it's a concrete subject, and this is what we're going to talk about. Also, keep in mind, I'm always going to mention STI prevention, contraception, and then, of course, specifically what kinds of sexual activity are agreed upon. And then, of course, a clear, active, verbal yes. Any questions about consent?
Okay, thank you, Amy. Our next question is directed towards Mark. What populations are more susceptible to sexual assault?
So when I was doing research on this, it definitely was thinking about females, just being more, I'm trying to get the right word, experiencing sexual assault, that's what I'm trying to say. But I was very shocked at the age where it started. They said from like 6 to 11, and I'm thinking, wow, that's so young. Like even in the slide, that it's like child sexual assault, and it's, I guess for me, I'm thinking about this again, a child. When I first saw the question, thinking like, well, 18, maybe 19, 20, college students, but as young as 6, it made it a bigger perspective, or just a bigger view, like, wow, this is bigger than what I think it is. I did see that, of course, males experience this as well. Not as much, but it does happen. I think that's another idea that's like, oh, this can never happen to a male. Like these things can happen to a male, female, it can happen to anyone. So, and again, it's not just one specific group. It's not just college students. It's not just like grads or just adults. Anyone as young as 6 can experience that. So that's something to be mindful of, I should say.
Does anybody else have anything to add? I don't want to, it's not just, Mark doesn't have to be the only one to answer.
I will just add that sexual assault can occur at any age, unfortunately, not just as low as 6, and that hurt people hurt people. The statistics in our country are that 25% of women and 20% of men are sexually assaulted or experience child sexual victimization before they reach the age of 21. And so if you extrapolate that to our population, that means that a significant portion of the people who may be in this room and are in our campus came here with the past experience of having been traumatized by sexual violence in some way or another. And that perpetuates both victimization as well as perpetration. And so it's important to be able to acknowledge and talk about your past and know the past of the people that you're connected to. Because what's in hiding is more prone to come out of our unconscious and come out in behaviors. What we bring out into our consciousness and we bring out into our conversations and out into our world is less likely to have power over us.
I'd like to add, Amy, Hal, and I, when we see students in the clinic, like Dr. Taylor is saying, many times they've suppressed all of the feelings from this. And so it's the first time that someone has asked them, has anyone ever hurt you? And so it's really important to know that there's a whole group of people who have had injury from sexual assault, that some of them don't recognize it, some of them have never been asked, but they need services to help them.
And exactly. And I will point out, one of the things that you may not realize is that sometimes for folks, when they get to college, it's actually the first time they can disclose. It's the first time they're away from wherever they were victimized or whatever the circumstances were that they felt like they couldn't tell. So it's very normal to have people, when they get to college or in their college years, that they disclose for the first time something that happened back, before they left or many, many years ago back in their childhood. So it's a part of the developmental phase that makes it safer once one gets away. So if that applies to you or applies to anyone you know, you're not alone. Come find us. Come find any of us. The counseling center. Come find someone to talk about it with. That's what we're here for.
Thank you. Okay, our next question is directed towards Deputy Chief Adam Brown. So I've heard the term CSA, but what exactly does this mean, and what is mandated or required reporting?
So a CSA is a Campus Security Authority, and they are designated by the university, but they're defined by the Jean Cleary Act. And just very briefly, if you're not familiar with the Cleary Act, the Cleary Act requires us, when I say us, I mean the university community, to track and publish certain crimes so that when you come to a new university, you know exactly what you're getting into. And right now I'm working on the annual security report, which is going to come out in October, and that's got anything that's happened on campus. So Cleary defines a CSA as basically, just in layman's terms, somebody if a sexual assault or another Cleary crime that occurred on Cleary geography, which could be campus or other buildings controlled by the university, if those crimes are brought to a CSA's attention, they are duty bound. They have to report it to the police. And so that ensures that stuff isn't stopping at a mid-level, it's getting to the police, and then we can investigate it. What was the second half of the question? I'm sorry.
That's okay.
Mandatory.
What is mandated or required reporting?
Well, as far as the Cleary Act goes, there are certain Cleary crimes, things like sexual assault, murder, kidnapping, robbery, burglary, auto theft, arson, things like that that we have to keep track of and publish. And when I say publish it, I mean we keep a crime log at UPD that anybody can walk in and see, and within 3 days, those Clary crimes have to go on the crime log. And we also do what I told you about before, the annual security report. And those are, I mean, we are bound by that, and any mistake that we made, I think the fee now for one Clery mistake is like $65,000. And if you think of a university this size, if we were not on our game and we weren't doing what we were supposed to do, that could be very expensive.
Thank you. Okay, our next question is directed towards Whitney and Tom. So who can you talk to if you've been assaulted or you know someone who has been assaulted?
So, as far as confidential resources, there's 4 entities on campus, maybe more than 4 now. Entities on campus for sure that you could speak with if you're looking for someone confidential. The Women's Center, the Victims Advocacy Program. Everyone in the Women's Center is considered a confidential resource. The Counseling Center, a confidential resource. The Student Health Center, a confidential resource. PERCH, a confidential resource, and the Student Ombudsman is also a confidential resource. All these individuals are trained to provide services and support for anyone who's a survivor of any type of crime. Additionally, there are non-confidential resources on campus that provide services as well. That could be law enforcement, UPD, JSO, depending on where the crime occurs, the Title IX office, which investigates incidents of sexual misconduct, the Dean of Students Office, and Office of Accountability and Resolution. All those individuals in some way are trained to assist anyone who provides services or needs services or accommodations. Anything that you need, like those individuals are available to assist you. The only difference is between the confidential and non-confidential resources. Some of the non-confidential resources are responsible employees. So once they are aware of a situation like stalking, domestic violence, sexual harassment, dating violence, sexual battery, they have to report to the university, and that reports to the Title IX office. But those are all resources who are available to assist you in any way that you need.
So I'll add a little bit to that, but you did a very thorough job of answering that question. My confidentiality as the ombudsman is actually limited, and I am a responsible employee. So I do need to report, but what I will do, first of all, I preface any remarks I make to a student by letting them know that. Secondly, there are ways of reporting that I don't necessarily give all of the information away. The other thing is I will walk that person through what their options are, let them know what's going to happen. But it's important to remember that the person who's coming in and letting me know that they're a victim of a sexual assault is always in the driver's seat. They are the ones that determine what's going to happen or what's not going to happen, as the case might be. So even if they're telling me and I need to inform UPD from the CSA perspective or the Title IX office, the decisions are still theirs. And that's, I think, really important, particularly in dealing with a victim of sexual assault, that they are in control of that situation. It's never been an issue for me in terms of those conversations or reporting, and I will continue, and I have over the course of time. If somebody wants to meet with me once, twice, or 20 times, it's okay. My personal preference, quite honestly, and this is not a slight to anybody else, is really to go where the student feels most comfortable. But the Victims Advocate is a great resource from a variety of perspectives, and they are confidential. So almost invariably, that's the first place I'll mention for the student to go. So sorry if I'm giving you a lot of business.
Whitney, will you talk about when we call you? I think it's really important for people to know how confidential it is in their choices.
Yeah. So what we've learned that where a survivor disclose is based off their need. So sometimes our students' first disclosure is to Student Health Service because what do you think they're looking for? I couldn't hear you. Well, they're looking for medications. They're trying to prevent pregnancy, different things like that, and they're trying to make sure everything is okay. But when they go to Student Health Services, they do a very trauma-informed intake. I don't know the actual word for it, but intake, and they may investigate and learn that this person is a survivor of a sexual assault. And then they talk to them about their needs. They sit down with them, talk to them, just provide emotional support and like that initial crisis intervention. And then they ask, well, would you like to speak to an advocate? If the survivor says, no, I don't want to speak to an advocate, that's all they do from there. But if the survivor says, yes, I would like to speak to an advocate, they call me over and they introduce me to the survivor. And then I began to talk to the survivor about what has occurred, some time frames for forensic exam. And then we transport the survivor with the assistance of UPD. Sometimes they'll escort me, sometimes I get to drive their SUV. But we go to the forensic exam, which is like a little house almost downtown, and we sit through the medical exam together. And once we're finished, we come back on campus and the student get connected to other resources. But in 2 weeks, that student would need a follow-up. And that follow-up is free because Student Health Services have kind of waived that for us. But so they have wraparound services if they're talking to any of the resources. But they are well taken care of here. And if you're connected with anyone, they are definitely going to transfer you and refer you to the best person who could assist you at that time.
I want to add something as well. As far as confidentiality goes, I don't want anyone to not report being a victim because they're afraid maybe that the police are going to know about it and we're going to get all in your business and we're going to force you to do something. It doesn't work that way. You can report. It's not uncommon. I will get a report when I come in from work and it'll say sexual battery at such and such location on campus, but they don't wish to speak to the police. So we still count it for our purposes. The victim still gets hooked up with the services that they need, but you don't have to go through the whole law enforcement and prosecution through the state attorney's office if that's not something that you want to do.
Do you want to tell them about Marcy's Law?
Marcy, yeah, sure. Marcy's Law, if Marcy's Law is really it's a victim protection thing that now whenever we write a report, we'll ask you at the end a series of questions if you want to remain confidential. And what that means, if we release the report, the name would be redacted. Some people say yes, some people say no. It'll ask questions like, do you want to be notified when the suspect is arrested or when the suspect gets out of jail? Those are all under Marcy's Law. It's worth looking up online to see. It's a good thing to have there. But that's when you sit down with a police officer. But I just want to be clear as well that you can get the help you need without. I mean, I would prefer everyone come to us and let us try to act on your behalf and put the offender in jail if we could. But if you don't want to go that route, it's definitely it's possible to get the help you need. We'll count the stats like we have to on Clary, but you remain anonymous.
It's important to say that, Chief Brown, because we do have victims who are afraid to report because they're afraid of social backlash. They don't want to press charges. They don't want anybody to know about it, and they think that if they call UPD, they're going to lose their anonymity and their control of their story. So I think it's really important, that point that you just made.
Afraid of parents. That's a big
Yes.
one too.
Yeah.
Big one.
Yeah.
So, since you brought up being scared of parents, at what point do you have to notify the parents?
Never.
Never.
You're adult. I mean, everyone, unless they're under the age of 18, and when we're talking about sexual and reproductive health, your rights are protected even under the age of 18. So I actually, in the student health clinic at least, I cannot share information with parents, even if they call and ask me specifically about a certain patient without written release from the student. I can't speak to anyone about your personal health information.
I've had many parents mad at me on the phone because I tell them, I'm sorry, your son or daughter or whoever is an adult, and I can't tell you. And they get mad at me, and I'm a father myself. I have 2 daughters. I understand it, but it's the way it is.
In the counseling environment, sometimes students really need to let their parent or need to let someone at home know, but they're afraid. And so a lot of times if that's the case, then we'll support them in figuring out how to tell or how to connect or be with them when they do make those connections or help them think through the ramifications of contacting your family versus not contacting your family. Those are all personal choices that ultimately only the student themselves can really decide. But part of the counseling process is to be able to help someone navigate some of those decisions and choices, because you don't have to do anything immediately.
I'd also like to add about reproductive freedom. You know, when we see students, they're adults, and if they would like to get on birth control, we don't contact their parents. We don't, you know, we can prescribe medications that are very inexpensive birth control that is personal to them. So it's a big part of your welfare at college is that you are now your own adult and you have access to these services.
Okay, thank you. So Whitney touched on this a little bit already, but Whitney, Tom, and Dr. Taylor, who else would be considered a confidential resource, and how do we access those individuals?
So student health is a confidential resource. Would you all like to tell the best way to make an appointment?
Oh yeah. You just call the clinic, or we have walk-in appointments. Especially if it's urgent, you can just call. There's an after-hours number that you can call. So it's really important. We try to get you in that day, and if it's very urgent, we will make sure that we see you that day. So that's one of our first lines as far as health services.
Mm-hmm. We would love for you to have an appointment so that we can get some background information before you come in, but the truth is we've had assault victims just show up, and that's fine. We can handle that too. So.
But I want to echo something that Tom said. Is sometimes you can go to who you know, like the person that you truly trust. That's why this panel is so diverse. Like we in different areas, different spots. I know I recommend to my students, like, be involved in extracurricular activities, like find a faculty or staff that you can trust, that you can vent to, just be vulnerable with, because they may know a resource that you are not familiar with. Like, I want you to take a look around in the room and see how many students are here, and think about some of the students who are not here. So by you being exposed to this, you are familiar with some of the resources, or even just some of the faces on campus. Say, hey, I need help. Can you help me? And I'm more than probably that we will say, stop, especially if it's an emergency, we will stop what we're doing and take care of that situation. And it even allows for your friends to know, if your friend wants to vent to you, you can say, hey, I know this faculty, this staff member, or even this student who is in this position that can help. So if you find someone that you can trust, and then that is a good start, and then move forward from there.
If I could just add a little bit too, not exactly the same thought. If it's urgent, if it's an emergency, if you need to see somebody now and immediately, we all take walk-ins. We're not going to say, oh no, come back tomorrow or come back next week. We'll drop what we're doing to work with you. The counseling center, who I guess is not here.
Well, I was actually going to talk about the counseling center and purchase. We can put a march ourselves together.
Okay.
But the counseling center has a wonderful group of resources in terms of there's an on-call number that's available 24/7. They have walk-in hour. You can walk in at any given point in time when they are open, and you can be seen. They'll do a consult with you. You can reach them online and request an appointment. So utilizing the counseling center as an outpatient clinic for mental health. It's staffed with psychologists, counselors, social workers, as well as students. The Osprey Perch program, which is different from the counseling center, we're an embedded model. And so our counselors are in the places where students live, work, and play. So we are in athletics. We have a team of people. We have a team of people in Rec Well that have counselors actually in the Reckwell building as well as at the ropes course. We have a team of folks in residence life, and I'm forgetting one of them. We're out there. Oh, and student health services. Sorry, we have a team of people in student health services. And so in any of those areas, you can ask to speak to a Perch counselor. Our email is ospreyperch@unf.edu. You can email us at any time, and if you need some help navigating where you could get to, we'll be absolutely happy to get to you. But utilize your counseling resources as part of your student fees. You have access and availability to licensed mental health professionals who are here to serve you.
And for the Victims Advocacy Program, we take walk-ins Monday through Friday, 8 to 5. And our crisis helpline number is, and everyone's number actually, the Student Health Services Counseling Center is also on your Osprey One card. So if there's anything that you ever need, all that contact information is on your Osprey One cards.
Yeah. The one point I wanted to add, though, is for Counseling Center for Victims Advocate, or UPD, most sexual assaults don't occur between the hours of 9 and 5. Mm-hmm. It's on weekends, it's late at night or whatever. Those three entities are there 24/7. They're reachable by phone. So that's important to know, so that when you need to talk to somebody, there's somebody there that you can talk to.
Is the residence life staff here at UNF, are they all mandated reporters, and are they all aware of these services for any of the residents that come to them?
Yes, housing and residence life staff are all mandatory reporters, but they're also trained in how to do that initial crisis intervention with anyone who's a survivor, including the RAs.
Good question. Okay, Adam, how can we report a sexual assault?
Well, there's many ways. You can call the UPD directly, and we will come to you and take the report. You can drop by Building 41, file a report with us that way. Also, you can, I'm not going to go into all the steps again because I described it to you. If you want to remain confidential, you can go to a CSA or counseling center or any of these other places, tell them what happened, and then they will notify us so that we can document it without knowing who you are or all the particulars. We'll be able to count that there's been a sexual battery on campus. But those are all ways to reach us. So really it's, of course, everyone knows 911. And then if you need to call the UPD, it's 620-2800. And we're there 24/7, of course, 365 days a year. And we will go anywhere on campus. And if we have to go off campus to meet with you, we'll do that as well.
Thank you. Our next question is directed towards Dr. Taylor and Adam. What prevents people from reporting?
I'll take it. I'll start there.
Okay.
From our perspective, there are a lot of reasons that people don't feel that they can report, and it can be social pressure. It can be embarrassment. The primary reason that I see clinically is sense of guilt, responsibility. That the when a sexual assault occurs, the victim is frequently perceives themselves to be responsible for it happening. Oftentimes, these are people that we know, and so there are conflicted relationships that go into that, and then the social ramifications, depending upon how you know whoever the person is. All of those things play into it. Past history of assault, past history that's been bad when people have reported or when things happened in their families that things were perceived to get worse because somehow it came to light. A desire to just forget about it and make it go away. There's a belief that if I'll just get through this moment, and go home and pull the covers over my head, then I'll get past it and I'll just go on and we'll pretend that it never really happened. I see clinically, my students and I see clinically folks who took that route and then a year, 2 years, 5 years, 25 years, The oldest disclosure of sexual victimization I took was from an 82-year-old woman. It's the first time she'd ever disclosed sexual assault that happened when she was 16. But it was the first time she was free. Someone had died, and after that person died, then she was free to be able to disclose her victimization. So trauma is like a scratch on I hope everybody still knows what a vinyl record is. I know they're making it come back. Trauma is like a scratch on a vinyl record, and as the revelation goes around, it may feel like it's gone, and then the needle hits it again with each part of our development. So those are reasons that they're afraid. The other thing is a lot of times they were at a party they weren't supposed to be at. They were drinking, or they were using substances. There was a variety of things that were in it that they feel they're going to get in trouble for if they tell, and loss of control. That if I tell someone, then I'm going to lose control. I've already had control taken away from me, so I'm going to now lose further control by telling someone. And that's why red zone panels. That's why to say you are in control, no matter which point you choose to enter into support, that support will come to you from a position of respect for your wishes. But it'll also help you get past barriers. If you have barriers to disclosure, the counseling process can be very helpful to help you navigate. It's not something you have to decide in this moment. Maybe it's over weeks or months or years that you decide what are you going to do as you unpack this experience that's happened.
In addition to what Dr. Taylor said, I also, in my experience, there's also possibly a fear or
There's lightning in the area.
This is that all clear message. The danger of lightning on campus has you may resume outdoor activity.
that is literally my fault. Those are my people that put that out.
Way to go, Adam.
But that thing goes for 2 minutes too. It really does.
The danger of lightning on campus has you may resume outdoor activity. This is that all clear message. The danger of lightning on campus has you may resume outdoor activity.
You sure? All right. Fear or a distrust of the police. I mean, that's very real, and I understand it. And in my prior life at JSO, I dealt with a lot of victims who were homeless or recent immigrants to this country, who were preyed upon because people knew that they were afraid to report to us. And for whatever the reason would be, maybe you had a bad experience with a police officer, or you come from a culture that doesn't trust the police. That is something that is it's a roadblock for us, and I totally understand it. But I would like to make my pitch. I'll just speak for the UPD. I'll speak for the people who work for us here on campus. We truly believe in the start by believing, and if you come to us, the situation like that, you're going to be treated with respect. And if you're not, you need to reach out to me and let me know, and we'll take care of it.
And can I add to that? On the student side, a lot of students are scared. They're like freshly out of or into college. They're 18. They're like at a party, underage drinking, and they're scared to get in trouble. The university has a lot of programs to offer. One that I think is really interesting is the Ambassy Program. The university offers it, as well as a lot of club organizations like the sports team, Greek life, that students don't take into consideration. So they might be somewhere they're not supposed to be. But it's still okay to report it. A lot of stuff is confidential if you go about things the correct way.
That's true if you're reporting an assault that you saw or know about, and you don't have to be the victim of it. You also are covered under that amnesty by reporting as a witness.
Just want to add quickly what Carlene said is what I've heard time and time again. But the other thing I've heard frequently is people saying, well, if I report, nothing's going to happen anyway.
No.
And everybody knows somebody probably who was reported a sexual assault and nothing happened. But I want to let you know that when you go to JSO and it goes to the state attorney's office versus when you come here and it goes to the conduct office, things are really different. So our standard is preponderance of the evidence within the university, which means more likely than not that it happened, as opposed to the criminal justice system is beyond a reasonable doubt. So when it goes through the student conduct system, things can happen. That would not happen if you went down the legal route. Obviously, there still needs to be a preponderance of the evidence, but the other thing is there's a lot more support when you're going through the system on campus. We're not going to just leave you hanging out there. We're going to be with you the whole time. So, but the other part is also true. A lot of times people don't want to report because whoever it was their friend, or it's a friend of a friend, or it's somebody that they socialize with, and they're just afraid of losing that peer group. So there's a lot of dynamics going on there. But the one that I just wanted to really make a point of is that nothing's going to happen. Things can happen.
That's a great point, Tom, and I would like to expound on that just a little bit, in that sometimes it appears that things do not happen because someone may report, and they may report a piece, but there's not enough reported for someone, for any of the entities to do anything with it, because again, it's challenge by choice. But it can happen that different reports can come in, but all of those reports not being sufficient to bring about anything happening. And that until someone is able to and willing to come forward to let victims advocacy know, to let any of those entry points know enough about what has truly happened, to give the agencies an opportunity to begin to make some changes. We can know, last year at the Red Zone, Chief Mackesy said, I know, our law enforcement knows these are things that happen in our campus. But if we know it, and if we know when we can predict it, then we can prevent it. But it's a two-way street. It has to be a relationship with the student body, with the faculty, with the staff, with law enforcement, with all of us, so that there's some people are willing to take some risks and be able to trust. Because if we get, I feel very confident in saying, if we, any of us, or all of us, get enough information, stuff happens.
Yeah.
Beyond a shadow of a doubt, stuff happens. We will do what needs to be done to protect you.
So, since it seems like it's such a widespread issue that's so difficult to talk about, is there something from like the student population side that we can do, whether it's volunteering or raising awareness for some of these resources that are available that can make it easier on students and also easier for you guys?
I'd like to address that. So you can see all of these students with blue shirts on. They're all senior nursing students, and this is their community-based project, where they are proliferating through the campus to educate people on the Red Zone. And so the more, and they're trying to engage, and we would like to engage with the student body in all of the sororities and fraternities. So that's our kind of our goal, is to engage with the students, and they're just the starting piece of this to proliferate the message.
And what you're doing is talking about it, asking that question. And in every group that you're in, being aware and being willing to provide information, to warn, to bring information about consent, to have those, we call those courageous conversations that allow you as a student body to acknowledge what the risks are, and acknowledge what there are certain fallacies about campus culture, and people come to college expecting that things are going to be a particular way, and it is expected that men will do this and women will do that, and this is what you're supposed to do when you're at college. That's all part of the social environment. If one believes some of those fallacies, it sounds like this college environment is set up for mass sexual assault. it's not really supposed to be that way. It's not really set up that way, but that's sort of a lie that culture can be perpetrated, particularly for freshmen who don't know. And so challenge that. Anyone can, offenders, people who commit sexual offenses, male or female, do not look like any particular profile. They are somebody's brother, they're somebody's son, they're somebody's daughter, they're somebody's friend. They're often in leadership positions. They're often perceived in the culture as being model citizens. Read the newspaper all the time. You can see people, because they're people, and the human experience is messy. So no one is immune, but the defense system is awareness and keeping it out of the shadows, making it possible to talk about it, making it possible to acknowledge. There's going to be a party. Well, know when there's going to be this party that there are risks, and be prepared to have an antidote for that risk, or to be prepared to look out for each other, be prepared to look and be a bystander, to be aware of what's happening and intervene. Be courageous. If you see something going on that makes the hair stand up on the back of your neck, that makes you uncomfortable, be courageous and intervene and speak up.
Go ahead, Emily.
Okay, this is like a question. It's kind of like a shameless plug for student health services, but they do have an Instagram and they share a lot of very like valuable information. There's some posts about the Red Zone on there. So if you follow them and then you share it to your followers, and your followers are like, hey, that's really cool, and they share it to their friends. I think especially now, like in the age of social media, that's like the easiest way to reach students. So everyone should follow them. They post lots of good information.
We've been talking for years about getting into housing. You know, I've done some talks with Greek Life and talks with athletes, but the truth is the way for us to reach students is through social media. We can reach everybody much easier that way. So.
I just want to touch on what Dr. Taylor said about acculturation in college. Media prototypes, movies, books portray college life as a rite of passage for these types of acts and events, and they're not. We really need to get that message out that that is not the culture, and we need to make sure that we stay and let students know that that is not, should not ever be considered the cultural norm.
A couple other thoughts. One is, Whitney didn't say this, but there are volunteer victim advocates. The Women's Center does a Friday lounge program every Friday. It's not always about issues like this, but sometimes it is. Backtracking a little bit to what Carlene was saying a few minutes ago about when we were talking about reporting, one of the things we know through research is that people who engage in sexual assault typically do it repeatedly. It's usually not something that happens once, that a person does once. So if somebody reports that something happened to them and they report who did it, again, it might be a part of the puzzle, it might be a piece of the information, but a lot of times that name will pop up time and time and time again. At which point, even though we might not have enough information at first to do something significant, as things occur over a course of time, we can. And obviously that's very important. If you have a serial sexual assault perpetrator, that's not somebody that we want on this campus.
What type of evidence are you looking for? Like, if I just tell you the name of the person, what are the follow-up questions?
That's a really good question. So if someone were to, depending upon the entry point that you use, whether it's student health services or victims advocacy or law enforcement, wherever, we probably all have sort of a different angle that we might take. But if you came in from the counseling side of things, our counselors would hear your story. We would take, listen to whatever it was that you felt like you needed to share, and help better understand how that impacted you, and what are you hoping from that. And so then we would connect you with victims advocacy and let them work with you as an advocate to help you navigate the different aspects of the system where you can share that name, where different things can happen to it. For example, like going through the Title IX office and going through that process. They walk through that process with you. Or perhaps it is going through law enforcement or going through student conduct. There's some different methods of what you do with that information. And so that's what would happen. But there is a process. If it will go to the Title IX office on campus, then that instigates an investigation into the allegations. And then from that point, the conduct process happens. Much like the law enforcement side, I suppose that's very similar to a law enforcement investigation.
If you come in and sit down with us and want to report as a victim, it's going to be the who, what, where, when, why. We're going to ask you all of the questions about what happened. We're going to try to determine, when it happened, where it happened. Did you know the person who was the suspect? We're going to ask you for descriptions. We're going to collect evidence if it's there, stuff like clothing and bedding and things like that. We're going to want to get you hooked up with the sexual assault center to go through an investigate or an examination. But we also make sure that we call the victim's advocate, because we understand that once the process of dealing with us and answering all the questions is over, then there's a whole different type of care that's needed. So, ours is a lot of the nuts and bolts, I would say, and then we try to put the pieces together and then put you with the right people.
I'd like to say that Whitney, whenever we have a situation where we need to get the victim's advocate, which is Whitney, she will tell the survivor, she'll say, we'll do exactly what you want to do. If you want to go have evidence taken, we'll do that. If you don't want to do that, we'll do that. So it empowers the victim, and she gives them all the control in this situation. So I think it's the best approach. It is the victim-centered approach, and we appreciate what she gives to us.
Thank you. And one thing I want to say, like when you're reporting to any of those entities, the UPD detectives are Hal Smith and Detective Heather, and they do a really great job. Our campus student conduct, they do a really great job making sure all of these processes are investigated very fairly. But sometimes we don't know the outcome. So I also have to make sure the survivor understands if they're reporting and if they're going through the process. Sometimes our system don't work. Sometimes it's not enough evidence to go to court. So we also have to make sure they understand their rights, understand things like that. But we also have to be there for them just in case the ball drops and this isn't the win that they have. So we kind of prepare them for that as well, just in case there's not enough evidence. And the state attorneys probably have taken a few of our cases, but many of our cases have not escalated to the state attorney's office.
Well, I need to say this though. If we get a sexual assault case, whether it's the strongest case we've ever seen or one that's got a lot of holes in it, we take every one of those to the state attorney's office. We do not let them stop at our level. We investigate them to the best of our ability, and then once we reach the point where we can send it to the state for prosecution, we do that. So it doesn't just stop with us.
What I was going to add is there's a number of us sitting up here, but there's a whole lot of other people on campus too, trained in trauma-informed care, which basically means that we understand that you've gone through a traumatic experience. When you come in, the way you've processed that, the way you've remembered that, the way you relate to it, is not necessarily linear, is not necessarily chronological. So it's not as if you have to walk into somebody's office and tell them everything once. When I was in the Title IX coordinator role, there were people I met with 5, 6, 8, 10 times. And each time it might have been just, oh, and by the way, I remembered this. Oh, and by the way, I remembered that. And that's absolutely fine. It's not, we're not going to say, oh, no, you're done. You can come back to that person as many times as you want to, as you remember things and as you can kind of fill in the gaps. So, but again, the other part of that is we're sensitive to that, we're aware of that, we're responsive to that.
I have another question. Okay, let's say like that person was one of your friends or one of your classmates, and I'm guessing this takes like several days to go through and get everything. If the victim doesn't feel safe around that person but has class, has to do this, or that, what are some actions you guys take? So
That's a great question.
It's a wonderful question, and our Dean of Students Office can help us with that. Where's our Dean?
Well, I'm not on the panel, but I am part of the Dean of Students Office. I know that one thing that we can do is do a no contact order for you and the other student, or for the two students involved, or whoever is involved. But Tom, do you want to add a little bit more?
I used to be the person writing those. So, in fact, a lot of times Whitney will bring somebody over to my office to say, this is what this person would like as what we call interim measures. In other words, as things are being investigated, as it perhaps is being adjudicated, what are we going to do to protect that person in the meantime? So a no contact order is one of them, which means, obviously, that those people can't have contact with each other, and it does work both ways. You can't have contact with that person can't have contact with you. Sometimes that means that we might even move somebody in a residence hall or change their class schedule. Sometimes if you're both in a class and it's the only section offered, and if it's a big enough classroom, we'll just say, sit on opposite sides and don't talk to each other. Or don't have contact with each other through social media. Don't text each other, don't email each other, don't tell your friend to tell your friend to tell that person something, all of the above. A lot of times what I do with Whitney is I'll send out an absence notification if the student needs to be missing from class for a few days, which obviously does not say why you're missing class. It just says for personal reasons the student's not able to attend your class for these days. I'm trying to think of some of the other interim measures we use.
So we also file injunctions, and that's a restraining order, a state restraining order. So we go with students to file injunctions, and they have to have due process. So they have to sit in court sometimes with the perpetrator if they show up. But we provide legal aid for that process as well. So if that's no contact orders or injunctions, if you're looking to ensure safety, we also safety plan with each of our clients.
A good thing about an injunction, if you go through that process and we, the UPD or JSO, serves that injunction on the person, and then the person violates it and we catch them doing that, we can arrest them on the spot.
Yeah. Many of our students utilize this as a mechanism for safety on campus.
Again, a lot of it's what does that person want, what are they trying to achieve, and we try to work with them to achieve those goals.
Yeah, I apologize if it's been asked already, but I'm just wondering, like, is there anything general that someone like me or really anyone can do to like help support this culture and kind of message that you guys are trying to bring?
Yes.
So I would love to answer on this one, even though I'm the healthcare provider. I think it's important to police your peers, honestly. Like when you see the jungle juice in the corner that's got something in it that we're not sure about, and someone has way too much to drink, and someone's trying to take that person into it, maybe you step in and say, hey, are you sure about this? Make sure that victim is safe, or potential victim is safe. I think that we can definitely police the party environment much better than we do. Go out with people who care about whether or not you make it home. Take very careful care of what's in your drink. We know that people under 21 sometimes have drinks. We have what's in your drink cards at the clinic that you can kind of test to see if there are date rape drugs in your drinks. Keep in mind that GHB and Rohypnol are widely available and used often. So if you see somebody that's had one drink and seems way drunker than what you think they should, then watch out for that person and try to maybe make sure they get home safely.
Student government also just funded $10,000 worth of nightcaps, and it's a scrunchie or a little keychain where you put it over your cup. And you put a straw through it or you can take it off, but that was something we did at the last Senate meeting of spring, and we did $10,000 for the students.
But something that, because I work with student clubs, and something she said is very important, is just being mindful of the party. Just being honest, going to a college party, trying to have fun, etc. But when you notice something immediately is off, it's you notice it, but yet you turn your head. I think that's where the biggest issue is at.
That's the problem.
Because like one of the panelists said, like, this is someone's son, this is someone's daughter. Imagine if you were the parent and these things could happen as well. And don't be afraid to, like, oh well, I don't. It's not my business. It is your business, because you won't want that to happen to your friend or just anyone. And then especially if these are people that you know, because again, just because they are friends or acquaintances, it doesn't mean that, oh, well, they will never do it. Because like I said, the people that victims know, those are the ones, that's who it comes from. So be mindful of that and be ready to intervene and say, hey, no, enough is enough, or we shouldn't be doing this, etc. Because it's the peer pressure of, well, I don't want to do this, and that's where numbers begin to rise so high. And yeah, so.
We would rather you be wrong than not intervene.
Yeah.
Right. And we talk a lot about, you can hear all the resources and all of this like wealth of information and support. And I can tell you from experience that every person up here does what they say they do. But I would like to shift toward prevention. I don't want to see 23% of female college students sexually assaulted. I do not want to see another assault in my clinic. So that shifting that toward, I really think, policing the parties is a big thing, and just not being afraid to be wrong.
And there are people who are at these parties that who are opportunistic, like they're looking for that person who has had too much to drink. So don't be afraid to intervene in that situation. It's like any typical bullying situation. There's a bully, there's a victim, and then there's a third party. And it's really the third party's responsibility. And it's the same thing here. So look at people if they're being opportunistic on someone who is not with their full faculties to try to help them.
So try to avoid that bystander effect.
That bystander effect, yes, absolutely.
I just want to let you know I wasn't texting or anything like that. I was looking up a day on the 14th. Is this what you were going to say? Whitney and I and some other people are going to be doing a bystander intervention workshop. A lot of times when you go to a party and you're out with your friends and whatever, you see things going on and you don't feel comfortable about them, but you don't know what to say, you don't know what to do. And hopefully, if you participate in that workshop, we'll give you some ideas of how you can intervene without being overbearing or looking stupid or whatever the case might be to get the job done.
Well, from a cultural perspective, it might be helpful. We don't really talk much about sexual offenders. They're bad people. They should not be here. They're ostracized. The truth is, people who are predators don't wake up and say, I think I'm going to become a predator. That's my goal. They're created over time. And it's like the frog that sits in the hot water. It goes into the cold water, and when the water heats up, before you know it, the frog has boiled itself to death because it didn't have the ability to jump out. Sexual offenders are often very much like that. And what happens is offending is often very much a social culture. There is often unknowing accomplices, people that would not necessarily don't see themselves as being someone who's taking advantage, but they get attached to someone, and then things that might sound odd become normal, and then our defenses go down, and well, this is just how things are, this is just how we do things, this is how things are supposed to go. And being able to say, that's a no, this is not how things go. There are things like consent, and there are things like respect, and we do not set up a culture, or we don't tolerate a culture that allows predatory behavior. Anytime people are hunting for the vulnerable, or for someone who is more easy to get something over on, or trying to use tricks, or trying to use ploys, or trying to manipulate a situation, that's not what you want in your campus culture. And it doesn't mean that everybody that does that is in fact an offender, but it means that they create an environment that makes it an offender's playground.
Yeah.
And you can't tell the difference.
The actual offender doesn't, you're not like part of the problem.
Exactly.
Right, exactly. It's don't set the environment which gives them a place to hunt. Take people out of the baited field. And if you decrease the victim population, so you empower people not to be victims, and then that decreases the victim population, and then you increase the observation, so there's a greater likelihood that they will get caught. It doesn't mean that you'll stop someone from being an offender. It means you'll make them move out of your playground.
Exactly.
Because the risks are too high.
And then people know, like,
That's right.
hey, don't do that over here, because
Yeah, we don't do this.
We
here.
don't tolerate it.
We don't
But
do
I mean,
this.
I feel like, hasn't it been such an issue for so long? I mean, what are the best ways to, like, combat this? I don't know if you guys showed anything before I came in late. Is there, like, has it been increasing over the years since, like, I don't know, like 70s, or stagnant, or?
There's way more data to support that that's what's happening, because for so many years we were acculturated that this is college culture. Yeah. And so.
Well, and not just culture, societal culture.
Yeah, societal culture. And so. Yeah. Shift.
We have more information. There is a greater awareness. There is less tolerance in our society for child abuse or for sexual victimization in some realms. On the other hand, there is still an entire segment of the culture that victims shame and blame, and there's a rape culture that has some expectations of women, or expectations of what social relationships and sexual relationships are supposed to be. The things that one hears in the way that attorneys defend their clients, or the ways that people defend themselves, just don't tolerate it. Being aware, being sensitive, being active. And being courageous, and being able to say, no, not here. We don't do this. That's not what happens at my campus. No.
Can I add? I'm sorry.
And when it comes
Was someone
to,
say something?
I'm sorry.
Everybody's excited now.
When it comes to high-profile populations, sometimes college students act as partners in crime.
Mm-hmm.
So they know a particular organization is perpetrating this violence, but they attend these parties or like social events and different things. Or someone could be a survivor within an organization. Instead of supporting that survivor, they push that survivor out of the organization where they don't have support. So making sure the activities that you're doing is aligning with the values that you say you want to change, and I think that also changes cultures too.
I'm not sure how many people are, like, how many students in here are, like, involved in any type of clubs, organizations. I know from my experience when I came to college, I did want to have a good time. Do not get me wrong. I wanted to just make new friends, go to parties, do etc. But if you're involved in, like, any type of club, organization, fraternity, sorority, challenge your peers to even partner with the dean of students, victim advocacy, because again, you have faculty and staff saying these things and students as well. But the more people share this message, the more it will get spread out to the campus. Because again, you just don't know who may not see it, but again, because you shared it or you say, hey, let's do this type of program or this type of conversation, that way it can be spread to more people. The conversation should not stop. It should not stop after November. It needs to keep going, because there will be a new freshman next year, and then another one, and another one. So we just want to make sure that everyone are aware of what's going on.
Another question, sorry. So you just mentioned partnering with one of these entities. So hypothetically, you are in an organization on campus. I'm involved with Greek life. What would a partnership look like? Because there's a lot of ways to like tell your
I
students
would
to
like
get
to answer
involved.
this question.
Amy, you answer this question. Amy partners.
Thankfully, I have been invited to a few sorority chapter meetings to talk about things like STI prevention and contraception and sexual assault, healthy sexuality. So more of that. But that's talking about the women who are often victims, like we also need, that's why I'm so happy that Mark is here and part of this conversation, because we need those same things to be happening at the fraternity chapter meetings and at the athletics, and it needs to be kind of everywhere and disseminated. And we can talk, women talking to women about, we have to have the other part of the conversation. It's not always men are the perpetrators and women are the victims. We know that's not true. But overwhelmingly, I'm so happy to see so many males here, because we have to bring them into the conversation exactly for the reason that you're talking about, is because you can prevent it.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah.
If you have another, like, it kind of sucks that it's that way, but if you do have like a guy kind of perpetrating someone, then you are another guy or a few of them, you come up and you're like, hey, like, knock it off.
And of course, I'm all about empowering women to speak and make good decisions for themselves. But the truth is, sometimes we're talking about people who are under the influence of drugs and alcohol, and their judgment is impaired, their inhibitions are lowered, and they're not making good decisions for themselves. So that's when Bystander would be great. What was your question?
I was just going to say, because you said you were talking to sororities a lot, and I think, although you said men, women are not always the victim, men are not always the perpetrator.
Yeah.
I think it's also important to talk in frats just as much as you're talking to sororities, because of the cultural reset that we're trying to put out, to make it not like an uncomfortable, courageous conversation, but something that
So
we're
I
all
haven't,
used to hearing.
I haven't actually gotten to talk in Greek life enough about sexual assault. We've talked about, like, Zeta does breast awareness. I've talked about that. So it's been things about sexuality and reproductive health, but we need to have more conversations about this red zone within those. So yeah, partnering is great. I'll talk anytime. I'll stay after the clinic any day.
And as far as the frats go, we get a lot of requests from the sororities to come and speak. The frats never really invite us, so I mean, I'd love to have some of the frats invite us there, but let me just bring this up, because I'd be remiss if I don't bring up this program that we have. I don't know if anyone's ever heard of RAD. It's Rape, Aggression, Defense. It is a self-defense class that we teach primarily for women, but men are welcome to come in there as well. But we have a female police officer, Karen Livingston. She teaches the class, and I agree with everything I've heard in here tonight, but I also agree, if anybody ever hears me do the run, hide, fight training for active shooters, I talk about hardening the target. That means, like this room, if we lock those doors, it would make it harder for a bad guy to come in here and to get us, so he'd go to another door. Well, if you learn how to defend yourself and how to protect yourself, I'm a firm believer in that. It's hardening the target, and it makes it harder for somebody else to victimize you. So that's another, I just wanted to make sure everybody knew that we do offer that. But I would love to come speak to some of the fraternities.
I just want to say this real quick right before your question, but I know we keep saying women, and men are very often the target as well in our trans culture. So you guys, we really need to walk around with our eyes open and not just think that women are the target, because many times it's everyone. I believe she had a question.
In terms of cases where it's lower severity, where it's something that just happens in passing, like catcalling or whatnot, what are some resources where students can confide and feel safe, where we can't go through the legal process because we don't have a face or a name or things like that?
Still though, you could prevent that from becoming a thing by getting some support for sure. I think you could still talk to any of these people up here.
Yep, absolutely.
Just because you haven't been physically assaulted doesn't mean that you shouldn't seek help. So anybody up here could get you to resources to help with that.
When it comes to catcalling and things like that, or saying, we get a lot of calls about the preachers on the green. They say very offensive things. We know they're offensive. We don't like it. But unfortunately, it's when you're looking at making a case and possibly arresting somebody, it's protected speech. They're allowed to say those offensive things. From a law enforcement standpoint, the things that we may be able to do for you, if it becomes a harassment issue or a stalking issue, we could get involved there. There's probably more they can do just for the, like you put it, the minor stuff. There's more that conduct could do, but there are things that we could do as well. And it's worth a call to us and explain the situation if you're comfortable calling the police, and let us see if we can help you in that situation.
And I've seen UPD just have conversations with the person who's catcalling, because sometimes they're not even aware that
All the time.
their action is being offensive. So sometimes you may not even have to escalate it, and they could just have a simple conversation. And sometimes when they get that first warning, that stops it. But if it continues, that's when we're going to be starting a stalking log.
And also a counseling process. If you are wanting to develop your sense of self and your sense of agency just in general and being able to feel more comfortable with your assertiveness in situations, then that's a great reason to come and seek counseling. Everyone that comes for counseling doesn't have to be at the bottom of their lowest point. Counseling for personal growth is really a thing. And so come soon.
We all need counseling.
Yes. I'm a fan of it.
I am too.
What great conversation and questions. Y'all are making me not have to do my job.
Actually, I think we're right on the agenda.
Y'all are doing great. So this next question is actually for every one of our panelists. What is another word that you would use instead of the word trauma? I'll give you a moment, and then Amy will start with you.
Oh, I think I'm going to go with lived experience. It's not always positive. Sometimes there are things, in fact, almost probably everybody in here has had some kind of trauma in their life that is part of their lived experience that shapes who they are and the way they approach their relationships. Especially because trauma becomes part of a person's self. I have many sexual assault survivors who did exactly what Chief Brown was talking about and Dr. Taylor was talking about, where they just decide to pull the covers over their head and it'll just go away. If nobody knows about it, I'm just going to forget about it. I actually can remember a student's face vividly who told no one, not her roommate, not her mother, not her friend, no one. She wanted to suffer it alone. She didn't want anybody to know. And that rears its ugly head later in ways that you aren't expecting. It impacts your relationships. It impacts healthy sexuality. So lived experience is what I was going to say.
Amy, I want to add to that sometimes those experiences come up at very vulnerable times, such as during childbirth. These experiences that you think is going to be this wonderful experience, if you haven't worked through those with counseling, you can see the deleterious effects it has on the individual. Many times, Amy and I will be doing a pap smear and tears will come down the face of the person and we say, have you been hurt? And that's their first realization that they've ever been hurt because they're not in control of that situation. So of course we give them the control, but it's so important that anytime somebody's been through any trauma that they work through it, because as she said, it will come back sometime during the course of their lifespan.
It's a wonderful book.
What's your word for trauma, Mark?
Wow, I'm gonna say a point in life, and that's like a point in life. It's something that happened.
I like that.
Everyone may have experienced a point of life, but it does not mean it is the end. We help to move forward. So I would think that's my word for trauma.
So I Googled on a Thesaurus synonyms for trauma.
Oh, you cheated. You saw the question.
Smarty pants.
But when I looked up synonyms, I honestly didn't really like any of the words that came up. Some of the words were stress, grief. Those were the two that I felt were the most connected to trauma, and I don't think those even resonate with what the word actually means. I really like the two that were said before. They're more than one word. But I think I would probably say overload, just like an overload of emotions and just the situation. So that's more than one word as well.
Yeah, I took mine. That was very good. But one of the basic ones for me, grief, overwhelming grief maybe, or pain. I mean, when I think of a traumatic incident, there are all, and not to get into details, but all kinds of traumatic things that I've seen throughout my career, and some of them, it kind of like you alluded to before, it doesn't hit you right away. You don't realize it. I was in a shooting one time, and there were things I didn't recall until much later, and you know, the feelings and things. So trauma can be different things, but to me, pain, grief, probably.
Can I say ditto? I'm just playing. I think my word would be a life-changing moment.
So the therapist in me I would love to have another word for trauma. But I would ask, why are we looking for another word for trauma? Is it because trauma is so commonplace and people are using that word and that's making people very uncomfortable? And I'm going to use the word trauma. But what I'd like to do is educate people about what trauma really is. What trauma is a life-altering event that happens that causes a number of different layers to be impacted, from your neurobiology to your physical being to your psychology. It impacts multiple layers of your body, and it changes your brain. It happens when someone is experiencing something for which they think, feel, or perceive that they could die, and there's a part of them that is at risk for death, whether it is a physical death or an emotional death or a psychological death. That's trauma. And it's prevalent in our society. And so I don't want a different word for trauma. I want people to recognize this is what it is, and I don't want to sugarcoat it.
It reminds me of The Body Keeps Score.
Exactly. Thank you.
Yeah.
Bessel van der Kolk wrote a book called The Body Keeps Score. He's one of the original scientists behind trauma-informed care.
As there are some like unique individual cases, I know it's probably not applicable to everything, but when I feel like saying sorry and, you know, just listening to someone might not even be enough when I hear something so horrid happen, do you have anything to, you know, recommend to try to, you know, help that person? Should I try to inform myself of things such as this, like I have specific information, but then you sometimes have people who don't want to just hear that information, they just kind of need someone. I mean, do you have any advice for that?
That's really good. Do you start by saying I'm sorry? I don't typically, when people share their stories, I really don't say, like, I'm sorry that this happened to you. Yeah.
So when people get information they're not quite prepared for, we're often looking to go into how can I fix this, or how can I make this better, or how can I do something? And for the most part, when people have had these kinds of experiences, there isn't going to be anything any of us can do at that moment to actually fix it, except, and it doesn't fix it, but it is to be empathetic, be open, give time, give attention, respect, recognize, hear the story. Yeah, validate their feelings, listen, and then believe and support, and recognize when they are ready to look for resources, or when they're asking for, or in some way indicating that they don't know what else to do. You are educated about the resources that are available, and you can always tell them, I have a friend in Student Health Services, in the Counseling Center, at Perch, in the Victims Advocacy Office, in the Dean of Students Office, at UPD, in student government.
You have friends everywhere.
You have friends. You have got
in
friends.
high places.
You have got friends.
Sometimes the hardest answer is that they really just need someone to sit with them, and there's nothing that you really need to say or do except be present. And sometimes, as the person trying to help, that's empathic, it's really hard. But sometimes just being that silent presence is all you really need to do.
Yeah, the inner therapist doesn't need to come out.
Yeah. Leela had a question.
I don't know if this is
Lila.
I was just gonna say that when you were explaining to me like what trauma is, to me it sounds like it's like a crisis, like a big moment in your life that your response determines how well you're gonna deal with it. And you were describing like a panic response. Like your body triggers a panic response that when you are triggered again to think of it, or whatever happens, you might feel a sensation, it triggers your brain to literally put out stress hormones that will trigger a panic attack.
Yeah.
So that is like exactly what trauma is. People have different things that
cause it.
And it changes the brain.
Yes.
It changes the brain. It changes the way
That's why I was
the
panic.
yes, it changes the way the brain functions post that
It's
moment.
different than just anxiety. It's,
Yes.
it's a full
Yes.
body experience
Yes.
where you're not really present
Yeah.
and you're just focused on like your own body. Like you feel like you're in like imminent danger.
But it is treatable. It is absolutely treatable. We know a number of different things. Mindfulness meditation. We know in terms of brain changes. My personal favorite is there's recently from Columbia determined that equine therapy can rewire the brain, and there are MRI studies that show that brains of traumatized people do in fact heal with certain different therapies. So trauma is very much treatable. The body will heal. We just have to make them safe, and then we have to give them the right kind of care that they need.
I'm just interested in what kind of therapy. It's not like CBT, right? It would be something.
You and I should talk. That's a long clinical conversation. But the answer is it's not limited to one theory. Yes. Go ahead. Yeah.
I think to like expand to the question he was asking, I think everyone should know that the victim needs support, not just that day.
That's
Like
right.
that day
That's
they're going to open up to you and you will listen and you will support them.
Yes.
But just because they don't mention it like a week from then, like you still need to bring it up, make sure they're okay. Obviously not in like what happened with that person because that might trigger that.
Sure.
But like just check on them so they can realize that you are the person that they're trying to.
That's a great point.
That makes a lot of sense to me.
You know, another point in how to, I guess, respond to victims, kind of similar, but kind of not. I've been married a long time, and I used to, when my wife would tell me things, I'm a fixer. I'd want to fix it. I'd want to jump on it, fix it. All right, move on. We're done. And fix whatever was happening and offer advice and all. None of that works. You know, sometimes people just want to be heard. They just want you to listen and be empathetic. They don't always want you to be the one to fix it. And I think that's important. And it's taken me a while to get there, but it's kind of it's a good thing to learn.
I was going to say, from someone who's like, you know, closer to your age and a student, when we were in our psych class as nursing students, we're all going to be confronted with this situation at some point. Someone's going to come to us and say this, and our professor said, you know, you don't want to be caught blindsided, not know what to say, so she kind of had us practice. I'm sorry that happened to you. I'm glad you're here. It's not your fault. And if you just kind of practice that, and when someone does come to you, you know what to say, and it's not going to be like a frozen situation.
Do anything for you. Just
I'm sorry that happened. I'm glad you're here. It's not your fault.
Yeah,
And then see
that's
where they
good.
go.
That's very good.
Yeah.
Kind of lets them control the situation.
One thing you might want to think about is that whatever is dealing with our own uncomfortability about the subject and dealing with our own fears and concerns about it, and given what your genuine reflection, whatever that might in fact be, because what can sound good and comforting to one person may not sound good and comforting to another person, and so it can be a challenge if no matter who the person is, we have a pat response. That pat response may work because it works for us because we can come up with it, which is better than having nothing to do and freaking out in the moment. But at the same time, reading who the person is going to go a long way. And trust yourself. Trust your heart. You care. And trust your heart and follow it.
And also not make it about yourself. Like because I feel like our instinct is to I can tell her a story that I think I could relate to the situation, explain my side, how I deal with it, and where I'm at now. And we just tend to do that real quick so they know that we had a similar feeling or feeling just like that. But everybody processes everything different, and that might come out like, oh, you're not listening to me. Like, you know, it's not about you. Like, that person wants to be heard.
Yes.
Can I say something to that? I think that's why it's so important to practice your listening skills. And have you ever just had a conversation like you're talking, like you're trying to talk at the same time, like, wow, we're not really getting anywhere. Like you like truly like sitting down to listen to someone and try to comprehend without immediately
Judgment.
responding to something can take you so much further than where you're at. And the second thing is pay attention to body language. When you're able to observe, especially if someone is, you may know, you understand how they move when they tilt their head. Like some of those things will be even to say, you know what, maybe I should not say something. But the biggest thing you can do, learn how to listen. That way, because really, this is what I think. Do you need anything from me? No. After that, no, there shouldn't be anything else but be present. Why? Because they simply said, I don't need anything from you. So just being present, just listening, not interjecting, not trying to fix anything can be so much of a help than you know. And we're like, oh, I gotta go do nothing. So that was something I would definitely say. Practice your listening skills in general.
Okay, real quick, just because Julie and Tom did not get to answer the question, and I want to make sure everyone knows.
Sorry. Well, Carlene said it
created
all.
disruption. I apologize.
But just pain, agony, deep pain, psychological or physical, deep pain.
And you put me at the end of the table, giving me the worst position here.
Sorry.
To me, it's an overwhelming experience or a tragic or threatening experience that really makes you, and Carlene said this, change your perspective on the world around you and on yourself.
Thank you. Well, thank y'all, everybody, our panelists, all of our students, everybody who asked questions. This wraps up our Red Zone panel event, but please know that we do have another event next Thursday at 2 p.m. It will be our talking series. It'll be more focused on trauma. So please come out virtually. It'll be on Zoom, but come join us. And then, like Tom said, we have another event the week after that, and then I think we have 2 more. We have just lots of events. There's a list of events outside on the front if you need a reminder. But thank you all for coming, and I think a couple of us will stick around if y'all do have lingering questions.
And I wanted to add, we're going to be outside the market days every Wednesday for the next...
Now 4 weeks. Yes.
I would like to add that the nursing students will come to any of the frats, any of the sororities, anywhere that needs to, we need to get the word out. They're happy to come, so please you can contact me, Julie Baker Townsend, and I'm happy to get them where they need to go so that they can relay the times of danger and things that students can do to empower themselves.
Give away free stuff.
Also, really quickly, we did our raffle for the book, and Zuri Bonden.
Zuri!
Go Zuri. Wonderful.
All right, we got a ton of pizza. So if anyone wants to
Eat it.
Yeah, take pizza home.
I think so. I think I'm as ready as I'm going to be.
Great, Jay.